Hey, it's Nikki, Llewellyn-Gregory, and you're on Gut Plus Science. You're in for a fast-paced, storytelling, action item-rich leadership growth experience. I hope you make this podcast a habit. I consider it a leadership mentoring tool. Learning together makes us better together, and that is how we change the world around us. Let's get to it. Hey, it's Nikki back on Gut Plus Science. I'm back with my friend Steve Perkins from Greenhouse. We're back for the RootsUp approach today, and I'm ready to learn about this intentional planning, this creating weekly rhythms that help us to intentionally live out the weeks that make us our best and create the best results. So really excited to be back with you today, Steve. And I'd love for you to open up with RootsUp is all about building from the foundation, these foundational practices that sharpen us to be our best as leaders and as humans. Tell us where the weekly planning rhythm became a core practice that you teach.
Yeah, it's a good question because I often don't share this part of it, but it probably makes a lot of sense for your audience. So I spent 10 plus years in the corporate environment, various companies and industries. And then I decided right after having our first baby and buying a new house and my wife stopped working, I decided I'm going to leave corporate and make no money. And I started this company. But one of the things that I left with was an understanding of all that it takes organizationally to make things work, along with a frustration that it was so hard to actually get things done. And we never knew our priorities. One of the biggest employee complaints, and I still see this in companies, is not knowing what we're supposed to be working on, like the most basic thing. And then the fact that just with organizational complexity, it was really hard to get stuff done. You talk about things a lot. There was always excitement around some initiative or goal, but we rarely ever accomplished it. Or I'm sure some people can relate. My experience was I never finished a project. I never finished a single project in my 8 years at that company because things change and the environment changes, and then there's a reorg, and then the priorities shift, and then there's a leader change. And so when I stepped into my own business, I made some vows. Some of them were, all right, I'm never going to run one-on-ones poorly again. I'm never going to have performance management that makes people hate their job. Some of these things. But one of my biggest ones was I want to always clarify priorities and actually complete them. Okay, so then you get into business, and my first lessons were, wow, all of the shiny startup culture, fun things are not what it's about. It's actually about the grind. It's about the doing sales outreach every day, over and over, doing all the hard stuff repetitively. And I'm going to guess, Nikki, you're kind of like me. My personality is not one that likes repetitious tasks. Are you like that too?
Same. I get bored super fast with the routine.
Yeah, I need so much variety. And so right away, I was realizing that trying to find new clients takes a lot of repetition over and over. And trying to hone in what exactly the business is also takes a lot of repetition of networking and conversations and doing these things over and over. And so really quickly, I realized I can't rely on my emotions, because Monday I might be motivated, and then Tuesday I'm totally not. And then Wednesday morning I'm motivated, and Wednesday afternoon I'm not. And so if I'm just relying on, Steve's going to be max capacity every day all the time, it's not going to happen. And I would ditch my own intentions constantly. I was like, every day I'm going to do 10 sales outreaches. And I never kept up with that. So actually this weekly rhythm was born out of that specific pain. I gotta find a way to consistently do networking, outreach, sales type of work that I don't enjoy doing, but I have to do it over and over consistently. And so for me, and maybe this is my engineer brain, I went to we need a system. I need a system that transcends the emotional ups and downs. It's my emotions are roller coastering, this system's going to stay steady. And that's kind of where the weekly rhythm was born, was something on a weekly cadence to set priorities, to keep those priorities, and to actually complete the things that matter. Because it's so easy to just actually spend our time clicking on emails and doing stuff that doesn't matter.
Yes, totally. I love the whole concept of eat the frog. I think that's a Brian Tracy thing. And I journal about that in my morning routine. And I love to watch how I write down my eat the frogs. And sometimes they don't happen that particular day, but I wrote it down and I see it every day and I can't stand for it to not be crossed off. So I'm like, okay, like, but I'm putting those core priorities in order and I'm focusing on that before getting sidetracked with my email inbox that doesn't stop growing. I wanted to share one practice that we do as a team in case there's a way that you can like weave in what we're doing well, our ways to sharpen. And then I know you have a story. You had told me about Christina, and I wanted to open up with that story about the like scenario about how weekly planning rhythm really solved this challenge. It's a nice highlight story. But our team, we like rituals, and to the point of me doing the same things over and over, if I can see them as a ritual that drives outcomes, I'm cool with doing that, right? Because it's moving things forward. Sometimes the things that you can't tangibly feel like, okay, this works, right? You let it go. You're like, oh, my 10 outreaches per day. So what we do as a team, we use Slack for our most of our communication. We have a channel called Priorities. And every Monday by noon, everyone on the team puts their priorities for the week so that other people can see them, other people can see how might they volunteer to help. But that is our North Star for every week. And we design those. We really want to be a culture that is autonomy driven, that is focused on like owning your role. And so everyone builds that ritual or that habit every week. And that's like people have said on our team, I love that we do this so much because that's my main place to go back to focus on like, what do I need to do next? I've got so much on my list, but I need to make sure these 7 things that I put out there are done. And it's like one of my most proud rituals we do. So might be able to tie that into some of the teachings today as I continue to learn more.
Well, I'm taking that one from you. I'm going to start that same thing. That's brilliant.
Yeah. Well, cool. I'm glad that I got to share a little tip. I was like, "Ooh, I have one that works in this planning rhythm really well." I'd love for you to share that story of Christina to bring to life, kind of the scenario that was happening and how you applied weekly planning rhythm to Christina.
Yeah, I mean, so she was a client that was in the same place it feels like everyone's in, especially leaders, overwhelmed, overly busy. And then that word disorganized. I think it's everyone's fine saying I'm overwhelmed and I'm busy because we all are. I think it's another thing to say I feel disorganized or our team feels disorganized. That one feels a little more, I don't know, there's something about it that's a little more I'm afraid to say that kind of thing. And she was feeling our team is so disorganized. So there's all these ways it shows up. Like people are working on the wrong stuff. We don't know what each other's working on, which, the genius of your Slack channel. But also things like people are working on stuff that's not actually the goals or not actually the priorities. Or there's, misses. People are missing and there's gaps of communication or there's duplicate work, all of these things going on in the organization. And at the leadership team level, she's like, we have to get organized somehow. And so I was just asking her one time, what kind of rhythms do you guys have? And yeah, there's a variety of words. Some people I think did you say rituals is what you guys call it? Yeah. Some people call it routines. I know if people are in the agile world, they call it ceremonies. Whatever you call it, the idea of these recurring meetings or ways of interacting that help us to be not dysfunctional, but functional together. So I said, do you have any rhythms? And, she kind of thought for a while, like trying to pull something out. Like, do we have any rhythms? So you already know the answer is no. But then she had that light bulb moment. Like, we don't have any rhythms together. We just are trying to crush through the work and get stuff done. And I don't know, for me, I'm often right away, I want to get rid of the shame. Like, no shame in that. We all have our dysfunction as teams and we all have a place we're starting from. And if you're a growing company, then yeah, you're really busy. So no shame there, but time to get some systems in place. So we talked about this weekly rhythm, and what was cool is right away, and anyone listening to this series will notice a theme. All of these tips are not just nice to haves. They're like right away you get results. So literally that week, her team got on the same page about what matters, who's doing what, when it's going to be done, and how we're communicating along the way. And it was like a 1 hour meeting that solves all of those. That's too good to be true. And I mean, the reality is, of course, it doesn't go perfectly, but they went from 0 to that in 1 week. Because if you have a consistent meeting with a structure where we set priorities, we get aligned, and we get motivated together, then it creates this cadence of knowing how, like, I know that meeting is going to happen. I know how it's going to work every time. So it was really fun because now, fast forward, it's been a little over a year, and you can see the growth of the business, the improvement in the culture, and people's engagement that really started with that one meeting. So a lot of times when we start working with a leadership team, this weekly planning rhythm is the first thing we kind of install into their culture. And you can make it your own, like you can customize it, but I think it is a foundational rhythm. And yeah, Christina like saw that big time.
Yeah. So I don't know anyone that's listening that doesn't want more clarity, a system that works, clear expectations with deadlines, consistency, collaboration. I'm like, that's just some of the words that I jotted down and like, okay, what does this do? Spending time, understanding your weekly rhythms and applying the framework to make it your own that works for you as your system. That's the kinds of outcomes. So, without that, I could see where like this disorganized, like, it's not just being busy, but it's like, I don't even know what's first. I don't even know the next thing. So yes, let's walk through. Is there anything that you would, button up for us on really just understanding the mindset as a leader, this mindset that we're taking on how we think about rhythms that I didn't cover already before we talk about like how?
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things we say here is the first job of a leader is to define reality. And that is really helpful because in the clutter of everyday busyness and so many things screaming at you, and I find myself doing this. I did it today. We had a fluke snowstorm in Richmond, Virginia. The whole city freaks out and shuts down. No one knows how to act. And so, we have school closings and everything's shifting last minute. And I had to do it for myself, like step back and breathe for a moment and go, okay, my first job is to define reality. And then my second job is to set clarity of direction. And so I think that's one of the mindset shifts is that we all got promoted to where we're at as leaders because we were good at doing the functional job. We were good at making the widgets and moving papers around and doing that stuff. And then at some point you became a leader, but the problem is no one usually informed you of that shift. It's like, you had a ceremony to say you're graduating college. You had a ceremony to say you're now married to someone. Like, but we rarely have a ceremony saying, all right, now you are not a doer anymore. You're a leader. And leaders have different job descriptions. Leaders do different tasks. Yes, you still do some of the functional work, but your primary job is to lead people, is to give direction, and is to set priorities, and is to set the culture and how we work together. So I just find that's really common with leaders. We need to understand that shift. And like, here's your permission slip if you're listening to make the shift. Like, you are now promoted from doer to leader. But you're right. It comes with a mindset shift of what is my primary job? It's not to do the work anymore. It's to set the conditions for others to do the work. And that is, I mean, I'll be the first to admit it's massively hard. I don't know how it's been in your journey, Nikki, but I struggle with this big time.
Yeah, same, same. It's so easy to slip backwards. Today I could say like, yeah, I mean, this makes total sense from a mindset and the why, and then it's just really easy to slip backwards because it's easier to just jump in and do the things, but that's never going to get us out of the rhythm that we want to be in, this better, more optimal, higher state of being, right? And the whole team. So, talk about, I'm so curious, like breaking this down to help a team be able to create these rhythms or at least this one rhythm that works for them. What's the process? Like, how do you do that? And how do you balance like long term and all the things versus like what's the priority right now? Give us the magic.
Okay. Well, yeah, let's just get into a tactical, like a formula here. Everyone loves a good formula. I think the important thing with formulas, though, is to know, okay, you have to customize it to your situation. It's never a one size fits all, but it's helpful to start somewhere. So I say that the weekly meeting rhythm has three parts. So when we say weekly rhythm meeting, I'm talking about a standing weekly meeting. I prefer it to be on a Friday. I know most people plan on Mondays, but I think that's a big mistake because the most productive energy is on Monday. So instead of like wasting Monday trying to figure out what we're doing, plus the Sunday scaries that come with Monday morning meetings, oh my gosh, what we hear from coaching, people dread that Monday morning meeting. And so I like, let's plan on Friday. Let's rest easy over the weekend. Let's hit the ground running on Monday. I mean, it's going to sound really familiar to your listeners if they were listening to our first episode. It's very similar. And so I like a Friday planning if it's possible. Then we can make the most of Monday and enjoy our weekend. And so this is like a recurring meeting. You decide how long your team needs. Most teams will start with like an hour-long meeting. My team does it for 2.5 hours because for us, this is like the most important time of our whole week. But, we have clients that think we're crazy for spending that much time on it. But whatever it is, it's a standing recurring meeting. And to your point about mindset, it's the most important meeting of your week. It's very easy for people to slide into like, oh, okay, well, let's shift it. Let's cancel it. Something came up with a client or a project or something urgent. And the thing is, we think this is an easy one to move because it's just our meeting and we can move our own thing. And that's exactly the problem. Like we move the most important meeting where everything else is going to get figured out. So if you have the standing meeting and you make it the most important, now we have something to work from. So within that meeting, what do? I say it's three things. The first thing is called wins and learnings. The second is called your main thing. And the third is called deep work. So we just go through and explain each of them. All right. So wins and learnings is a simple way to create some positive energy in the team. I'm curious how it is for you guys. I just think a tendency is we do our work and we focus mostly on what's not going right or what needs to be improved or what's coming up next. And we don't spend a lot of time reflecting on what went well and what were wins and what already happened. So the idea of wins and learnings is everybody in the group just writes down and shares one thing that was a win this week and one thing that was a learning. And it's really that simple, but you go around and share. And at first people might feel like, oh, this is kind of cheesy or this is a waste of time or we don't need to do this part. And I promise you, like it's really powerful because over time you see the wins pile up and we recognize it. And the learnings, we learn from our mistakes, but we also learn from what went well and we build on that. And so it's kind of just a nice practice for the team to be in to start with that. Some people do it a different way, like just scoring, how are you feeling coming into this meeting? Like a 1 to 5, where are you at? Or how was the week? So you can kind of play with it different ways, but the idea is like let's get on the same page and let's take stock of what's going on before we just dive into more work.
I love that. And I think the wins, the energy from sharing those around all participants builds so much momentum for, that meeting because how many times you had no clue of at least 3 of those wins.
Yeah.
Like, and then it's a story that you can be using to share like in client conversations or at the dinner table, like just sharing with your family, like, look at what we're doing, right? That you didn't even know was going there's so I think the word momentum and then the learnings component, one of our culture codes at PeopleForward Network is embrace failure to learn. And so we share the stories of as a celebration, what we tried that didn't go as planned, or we dropped the ball and we didn't have a system for this. And this is what we learned. And then we share that learning a lot of times through the failure of like, we stepped out and we did it, right? We won't repeat that again but then it's helping others to shortcut like, oh, I will always use monday.com to be able to walk through this so that I don't miss the step because I learned from Ashley, right? And it's just empowering. It helps everybody to feel human and learn from each other. I love that.
That's really cool. Do you ever find that people, like, where do they get hung up on embracing the failure part of it?
I would say that my first thought, if I thought more, I might get a little deeper, but it's building the muscle because others are vulnerable about it and you just being around it as a norm. So it's like a ritual for us to share that because it's one of our culture codes. It helps others that might not be as prepared for that or like that's like normal for them to start to be like, "Oh, this is just what we do." And it just takes time because of the repetition and hearing others do it. And I've heard from I can think of 2 people on my team that they've said, because we do that at People Forward Network, how that shows up in other areas of their life, like in all the other hats that they wear, that they're inspiring other people. They're like, "I never used to bring up things that I would fail on because I felt like a failure," right? Like, versus like, this is me stepping out and learning and growing myself. So I think it's a thing, building a muscle over time because you're around others that make it a norm.
Yeah. I love what you said there. This is just what we do here. I mean, that's so much of culture, this is what we do here. This is how it works. And yeah, there's a normalizing effect that's really healthy in that. We all fail. So first of all, we're acknowledging reality that failure does happen, but we're actually learning from it because that's how humans grow and that's how teams grow versus trying to hide it, which is if that's how we do things here, it's never named, but everyone knows it's in the air and it's forming the behaviors and kind of infecting the whole organization.
Yes.
Well, that's good. So, I mean, whatever people want to make it, that first step, I like to do wins and learnings. There's many ways to do it, or kind of like your example, you can shift it or add to it and kind of make it your own based on your values or your team culture. But that's step one. Let's kind of take stock and not just race forward to the, you could have 100 wins in a week and one painful thing, and we're all going to focus on the painful things. So it's good to call out the wins. All right. So step two is called the main thing. And this is simply naming your priority, each person naming their priority for the following week. It's probably helpful to say in the American business context, the word priority means one. There can only be one priority, but we love to make it priorities. And there's a book I absolutely love on this called Essentialism. Have you ever heard of that one?
I have, and I love that book.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So I had Greg come speak at an event one time and we were chatting about it. And it was helpful to hear his take on the book because this was the point that he focused on the most. To him, the idea that the word priority means one was like, that was the whole book to him. And I love it because it helped me shift that understanding too. I think of priorities and I picture my Trello list with, 56 things on it that are all equally important. And I think everyone listening knows the problem with that is then nothing is most important. And so even though the practice of naming one thing can be very difficult, I like to really press people to try it because if you name one thing and you actually make it a priority, you'll probably get more momentum every week than if you had 10 or 20 things that were equally important. And so it's like that immediate objection, someone listening goes, yeah, but I actually have 3 things that are an equally big deal. And the point of it is, okay, I get it. I understand. But if you can name one of them, then your focus is able to build momentum. So it's almost like more of a practice and a muscle builder than anything.
Absolutely. I would be curious if you wouldn't mind sharing. So you do your Friday meetings, and one of the things that you said is this becomes the most important meeting of the week. Like, wow, that we create this rhythm that becomes our most important meeting of the week. Whereas I think it's so true, the opposite. It's like you said, we'll move the meeting because it's too busy, right? But that's what we're going for, right? And yours is 2.5 hours that you said some people will give you a little heck over that. Can you give a couple of examples of what you remember recently as an example of a priority from a couple people on your team?
Yeah. Well, let's use this week as an example because so where we tend to fail the most with this practice is we tend to prioritize like the biggest client that's on the calendar next week. So because it feels like a big deal, right? We're performing for them. We got to show up. It's really important. It's money related. And so I actually had to stop us this past week in our planning because we were doing that, making that mistake again. We were saying that the client engagements we had, meaning like big corporate clients, were everyone's priority. And I was like, hold on. Actually, the priorities, our main things should come directly out of our goals and intentions for the year. And this is, again, where I think like strategic planning is not just a fun exercise. It's supposed to guide our actual decisions every day. So if we've done the work of setting goals, which we have, then everyone's main thing every week should align to those goals and be working toward them. It's very rare that your main thing should be something that's not aligned to those goals. And so I kind of called our attention back to that because I make the same mistake. Over time, I just drift. I said, okay, but we have to make sure our main things are aligned to those goals. So let's pull up the goals, let's look at them, and let's all decide what are our priorities coming out of those. What ended up happening is everyone's main thing shifted from a client-related thing to a internal team thing. Because a lot of our goals this year are around creating better structure and training as a team. And so it was good because, of course, the client stuff's still going to happen. It's still on the calendar. But now what we're going to make sure that it gets done no matter what are those internal things related to our goals. And so people had stuff around, outlining some training and getting a certain meeting on the calendar with the team and things like that. I found that the challenge, though, with pulling priorities out of goals is we can make it too big. Like a lot of times the most important stuff is really strategic or really creative. It would take weeks to get this thing done. And so I think a good practice, and you can challenge each other as a team, is trying to chunk it down smaller. If someone in that meeting said, okay, create the coach training is my main thing next week. It's like, no way, that's going to take months. So let's chunk it down. What is the first step in that project? Well, the first step is to gather all the different notes and get it into one document. Okay, so there's your main thing next week, because that's something you could get done in an hour or two. And that's kind of the ideal for a main thing. It's a top priority, but it's a small enough chunk that you can get it done in one sitting. The other piece that this helps with is if you've got that in place, now you can create momentum. There's the word again, in your week. Because if Monday you do that thing and you get it done and you can check it off, you've already been more successful that week than most people are the entire week. It's like we tend to get distracted all week long and then maybe Friday try to do something important. What would it be like if every week you got one major step done towards the goals, and then stuff can hit the fan, and then you can have, fire drills and other things happen. But before all that hit, you got something really, really important done.
And, without this structure, so much of our lives end up in the reactive category, right? And it's like I hopped on email because I was going to do some responding, but oh, it's been 2 hours, right? I
Yeah.
just lost track of time. And like so many times we do that versus I'm not even going to open my email until I take the steps on this thing that I know what I'm doing, like this main thing, so that the distractions aren't there, which is reactive. And it's again, like I said, like we were saying earlier, stepping in and being like, I am here to lead us forward, not to jump into the doing, right? It's so much easier said than done, but it is simple, not easy, staying focused on those main things and not letting those distractions come in because we're doing this thing first, this priority. I like that versus the priorities. Priority.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is really hard for especially leaders who might be in this meeting and they lead a whole organization and there's tons of work going on in the organization. And, they'll complain like, well, there's no way I could come up with one thing. I lead 500 people doing all of these activities. And I mean, I think that's kind of the point, that it's supposed to be hard to name one thing, like we want to build the muscle of defining what's most important. And there is no easy answer to that. It is supposed to be a hard exercise.
Well, and I think too, to clarify, it's not that you wouldn't have your to-do list of priorities for the week behind your main priority. It's calling the one big thing that is going to move you forward and get the greatest impact or momentum, claiming that one and staying focused, not to say like, yeah, you've got other things that you're doing throughout the week. You're just like, this is my North Star.
Yeah. Okay. So here's a great point, Nikki. I'm so glad you brought that up. Because yes, I mean, we all have giant to-do lists and they grow faster than they shrink, of course. But this week is actually a perfect example. So I'm in Virginia. We've had snow. So everything's shutting down. We've had these random snow days, but everyone kind of freaks out. And my wife is at a conference for her work in Florida. And so I'm on kid duty, like with plans changing every morning. So it's one of those weeks where like everything hit the fan, nothing is as it was planned. And so I actually only had, let's see, so it's Wednesday, we're recording today. These 3 days, I only had time up until now to do one like meaningful work task because my time's been divided the rest of the time. And so I really had to decide like, I have this one chance to get some childcare help. What am I spending it on? And because we defined the main thing last week, I knew exactly what was going to fit in that 2-hour block. You know, it was a really important prepping for a really important team meeting that was setting some direction for our team. And that's what I spent it on. And it's like, okay, the fact that everything else on my to-do list is not happening this week. I mean, I don't love that, but it's okay because I got the most important thing done. So it's like, that's the kind of thing that it affords you. And then as you lead others, of course, it's exponentially better because you're giving them more clarity on what matters.
Okay, so we talked about the wins and learnings as the first category, really good energy, check-ins around the table, if you will, momentum builder. And then we're narrowing in on the main thing, which is our one priority. And then there's a third section of our rhythm, right?
Yeah. And I like how you said that. It is, you can kind of picture like the team is around the table, it's going around, everyone's sharing their main thing. And some people, by the way, will say, I don't know what my main thing is, or I didn't have time to prepare. Sometimes it's good in the meeting to just give people time to think. Like, let's all take 5 minutes right now and, look at your plate and decide what matters. So then we move into step 3, which is all about creating that deep work block. So having a block that following week when you can complete your main thing. And it's just about this cascading, like, let's not call it a main thing and then not treat it like that. Let's actually treat it like the main thing. And so what I recommend is Friday, you do planning, Monday morning is your deep work block. And right away, like by Monday afternoon, you're ahead of most people. So the deep work block can be however much time you need it to be. If you do creative work, you probably need bigger blocks or strategic work. If you're more task oriented, you probably just need a shorter block. But for me, I block off all of Monday morning. Every Monday is a no meeting zone, and I'm getting these important big things done because, for me, my main things are usually fairly big. So there's a book on this called Deep Work. Have you heard of this book?
No.
Okay, it's a really nice pair with essentialism that we mentioned earlier. Because essentialism is more about the philosophy of prioritization and what matters most in your life and your work. And then deep work is a little more of the tactical, like, how do you focus? How do you focus on what matters? So I highly recommend the book. This concept just came kind of straight out of there. Like, let's put a block on our calendar where we block out distractions. We set our environment as best as we can to focus. We already know what we're working on. It's predefined, so we're not having to figure it out, and we just knock it out. So I'll ask you first, like, when you do focus time, what does it look like? How do you set that up for yourself?
Yeah. So going back to my learnings that are just, it's food for thought. I'm really chewing on all of this. One of the things that really works for us is, and we call it the Prios channel, right? That I shared in the beginning of this. And the only things that go on that Prios list are like eating the frogs, right? So you're challenging me to think about, okay, what's the one thing, which I'm going to be honest, like I'd have to figure out, ooh, how would I do that? Because I drill it down. And sometimes there's 4 things, 7 things, right? But it's like what guides me for the week. It's what helps everybody else know what I'm working on, what they're working on. We all step in to help each other. But that is what guides the blocks that I create. I have times throughout the week that I protect and do not allow other things to get scheduled, and when I do, I am so frustrated with myself because every once in a while I do let a meeting slide in on these time blocks, but like you, Mondays in the morning to get set to make sure that I know coinciding with our priorities channel that everybody on the team is, not only submitting their priorities, crafting their own, looking at how they can help other people, reaching out, right? Like all that collaboration to get set for the week. I need to be focused on that so that the rest of my hours behind noon on Monday are very much focused in alignment with my planning and how I can support the team. And then on Tuesdays, we also learned from the don't do meetings on Monday thing. I also like your Friday, but I'll tell you what I have learned to do on Friday that works for me. We meet midday Tuesday so that everyone gets their week rolling. The energy when we used to do Monday meetings was so tense. Like, people would be, I mean, it was just like, okay, and it just was not nearly as productive. We saw that, felt that, moved it to Tuesday midday. So we're behind the first part of our Monday is we all know what we're doing, how to collaborate, like, we're all in a rhythm on that, good. And then by the time we get together on Tuesdays midday, there's a section in our meeting. We use an L10 meeting guide from the EOS model. And there's a section in there for our goals and what we learned going back again, what not to do. We used to do our grand strategic planning and we'd have our big document that you'd scroll and scroll and scroll and look at all the things. And it's like, oh, this is just overwhelming and it's not productive. So we started to break down our sprint goals for the month. That strategic plan that you'd scroll and scroll, that guides the focus for the month. We never have more than 5. Our sweet spot is 3. And so every Tuesday, we're looking at those, and that is our true North Star, right? As a team, our priorities that we're putting in that channel are coming from that. But then by the time I've had my Monday and Tuesday and met with everyone, my Fridays to the point of having peace going into Friday, we have 4.5 day work week. So we pick our half day. Mine is usually always Friday at 1 is when I shut down. But I only do internal meetings on Fridays and I have time blocks for me to wrap up my week based on my priorities and what, might eat the frog. So, yeah, time blocks so important, and it's just really important the when you're doing those certain things. Monday frantic meetings where people are scattered, no more of that. And Fridays wrapping up with like not this crazy desk that it looks like right now with all the stuff. Like I'm able to go into my week with peace because I wrapped up with the most important things to make sure they were done.
Yeah, I love that. Our calendars as a team are so similar. And I think that's not an accident. You were naming some of the pain points, but it's true for almost every kind of team. And so I think one of the problems is people in bigger organizations that have interdependencies and maybe it's matrix or there's cross function. How do you do it when you don't have full control of the calendar? And I don't know that there's a simple answer, but I have seen over and over that there's way more flexibility than you think. Like it might just take somebody raising their hand and asking or suggesting a shift, especially when people can align their calendars. Like your no meeting Monday. If everyone on the team is doing that same kind of block, or sometimes teams will do it with like a creative work block. If we align those, then there's less chatter of people needing each other during that time, and it makes it more possible. So, there's ways to get creative with it. But yeah, I love the structure you guys have. I was thinking about with a deep work block, it's taken me several years to hone it in, how I set myself up for success. Cause I am definitely the first person to get distracted, to open those emails, to like think of something else and get sidetracked. So I've had to work really hard to come up with what is my environment like? And a lot of times for my deep work, I'll go to a coffee shop, somewhere where I can't be interrupted as easily. Or if I'm in my office here, I'll close the door, and I've already told people like that's kind of an off limits zone when the door is closed. Try to get uninterrupted and then shut notifications off, close my email tab completely. Like for me, turning music on that's like high energy music helps. I think for me, that helps me to focus and block out distractions. For some people, they need peace and quiet or a different kind of music. For each person, it's going to be different, but think about how you can set yourself up for success is a big part of it too.
Yes, I am with you on the turn the notifications off. That's just a quick little tip to like stay in intentional focus throughout your week. It's like, so I told you we use Slack. And for anyone on my team that has not turned their Slack notifications off on the day to day, I'm like, I don't know how you'd ever get anything done, right? So that's just like a simple example of like, if you have notifications on, this is the complete opposite of like the weekly planning rhythm, right? Like it's constant distractions. I love this meeting model, and I just think it's a profound statement to say, we are creating the system, which is this meeting, to be the most important meeting of the week, and how do we design that where it's an energizing, momentum building, focused approach that like guides our team and becomes this cultural norm. This is the way we do things here, right? I love it so much.
Yeah, it's almost like you could think of it this way. If everything else failed in my week, but we got our main things done, it would still be a successful week. And I think honestly, as a leader, if you look at your goals and you've set those goals, you could almost say the same for a whole year. Like obviously there's business as usual that has to happen, but if everything somehow in some alternate universe went sideways and the whole year you didn't get anything done except these main things, it would still be a successful year. I mean, that's the goal, is we're trying to put our best energy into the most important work. And we have to do it really intentionally because we're now in a working world that's just buzzing with distractions constantly.
So, Steve, this has been another amazing episode. So many key nuggets and takeaways. We're going to have to do some, hey, let's bring Nikki back to talk about action put in place to advance the efforts and talk about some of the stories of impact because you're just helping to sharpen. I am a very intentional human and I love ways to sharpen. I'm sure that there's other leaders that are like, oh my gosh, all of this is so new to me. Where do I even start? And it's like, that's where we've been mentioning the RootsUp quiz, which is this amazing intentionally designed tool that helps any of us, take this simple tool. Would you say it takes like 6 minutes or it's very fast, right? And then it creates this growth map, right? It creates a roadmap that you guys call growth map to create this plan of action to meet where you are and to take that next like highest priority step, right? Do you want to talk any more about the Roots Up quiz? And I know it's linked here in the episode for all to have free access.
Yeah, free access for everyone. Please take the quiz. That was well said. It's just, we know that in this kind of work, it is overwhelming and hard to know where to start. And it's hard to make time to start. So, what I can promise to people listening is I've basically spent 8 years trying to create this quiz. It's like, the simplest things sometimes are the hardest. We have worked so hard to create the simplest, just get over the hump and get moving because action brings clarity. But the hardest part is that first action. And so, I went to a webinar workshop thing the other day, and it was the same thing. At the end, he was really encouraging us to like hang up and immediately do our next action step because otherwise you lose, by tomorrow, you'll lose your momentum.
Yeah.
And so that's the point of it. Just like you said, it's a tiny step. It'll be like 5 minutes, but you do it right now and it gives you your next step. And that's a baby step forward. And then we take it step by step and eventually we make a huge impact and a big shift. So yeah, there's lots of ways, that we can help if people want to take a really big step. That's our encouragement. Do the quiz, find your first next step and just make it happen while you're energized.
We just left the world a little bit better. Now, go do something with it.